Yo, do you like indie games? Do you wish that you could be a cool bug in Dark Souls? With jolly cooperation? For less than the price of a Crunchwrap Supreme? If you answered yes to any of those questions, then man, is it about to be your week. So in the middle of last year, indie immersive sim dev Wababoy participated in a game jam to take a break from making Sorceress, and the idea of the game they made resonated with a lot of people. What you see here is called FlyKnight. It's that game that you've been seeing around social media for a few months now that's got that old school RuneScape aesthetic nailed down. Well, since so many people thought the idea of the Game Jam game was great, Wababoy took the next 6 months and assembled a team and developed the Game Jam game into a full-fledged title. And here we are. I played right before it came out and it was far better than I was expecting it to be. Like, it scratches so many itches and the gameplay is fantastic. There's a Souls-like nature to it without it being derivative, a ton of cool gear to collect, fishing, and cool bugs. FlyKnight is good. Like, got to an overwhelmingly positive rating on Steam within 48 hours of launching levels of good. Like my new favorite non-FromSoft Souls-like good. And the insane thing is that this game is only $6. Like, oh my god, it has no right to be that cheap. Speaking of Wababoy and Sorceress, remember Sorceress and its crowdfunding campaign we helped out back in the day? Well, if you did pledge to help get Sorceress funded, you have a key to this game waiting for you. This whole game was made to help get more funds for Sorceress, so Waba announced in the Sorceress Discord that if you pledge, you've got a key. And one last thing before we get into it. Patrons, first off, thank you as always. You make these videos happen. And secondly, if you haven't already, make sure to go and vote on what the next patron video is going to be. We've got some good options here and it's a pretty tight race right now. I just want to make sure you all get the chance to have your voice heard before I start working on these. Also, you don't have to be a longtime patron to vote. You can pledge literally right now and get a vote if any of you non-patrons feel strongly about any of these videos ideas. Just make sure you vote. Welcome to FlyKnight. You wake up in your underwear after a pretty intense evening, which we've all been there before, but unlike your typical convention bender, everyone around you is dead. Time to find a weapon. Weapons can all do the usual trio of slash, crush, or piercing damage, and some of those are going to be more useful than others. You get a healing potion with 4 charges, and you rest at bonfires to replenish your health and said charges. I think you know what's going on here. Weapons additionally have specific attack directions which can be fairly handy for getting past armored parts of an enemy. The weapon strike direction is also influenced by which way you're facing and which way you're moving, so not having the right weapon equipped to get past an enemy's armor is not the end of the world. You can have up to 4 weapon or weapon and shield combinations equipped at a time, but you also have equip load, which governs your stamina regen, so gear up wisely. Then there are spells. You get your basic projectile right out of the gate, which costs little mana and weighs literally nothing at the cost of not doing a whole lot, but an ammunition-free ranged attack is never something that you should snub. Spells range from lesser things written down on paper that don't affect your equip load but don't do much, do not underestimate that wind spell though, to stuff that's written on literal boulders, making them heavier than some chess pieces in the game, but if you're willing to shoulder that burden, they have devastating effects. I went with a caster build for my run, and the combination of the swarm spell and the dismemberment-tastic root wall was devastatingly effective at clearing rooms. Speaking of dismemberment, any limb can be removed with enough violence, and some of your adversaries have lots of limbs to remove. Obviously, weapons that do slashing damage are great at this, but that comes at the cost of having your enemies wearing any armor whatsoever being a serious problem. A solution is to just remove their stupid legs. That'll do exactly what you'd expect it to do, as removing their arms can get rid of an enemy's weapon, but they'll just start kicking you in the face and knocking you down in the absence of their sword. You can straight up cut off a bug's head too, but they can still keep going after that because bugs, I guess. They have a hard time defending against your attacks headless though, as they can't exactly see what you're doing, so it's easy to land weak point attacks on these guys. It's very Kenshi-esque in a good way. Better in a way because unlike Kenshi, you can actively target which limbs you want gone once you know what you're doing. Nothing is more satisfying than dueling a harder enemy and completely changing the dynamic of the fight by taking out their sword arm. What makes your weapon choices as far as slashing and smashing especially important is that there is no leveling up in FlyKnight. Your stats are governed entirely by your equipment, and other things we'll get to in just a sec. that means your armor and choice in rings and spells are your whole build. Don't worry, there is a lot to choose from, but there's no leveling your way out of a challenge because there's no leveling up. Swapping out gear is pretty quick though, and often a set that's good for facing whatever you're about to go up against is always nearby. That makes exploring the expansive levels extra fun because often you'll find chests with whole unique sets hidden in nooks and crannies or behind particularly tricky bugs. I started the game with the base set and discovered that I could be a literal onion knight, so I grinded the first area to loot a whole set off the plant enemies and tanked my way through the first half of the game. Then I found the sorcerer's set, which was not only lightweight enough to allow for lots of attacking, but also went well with a samurai sword I got off grinding the particularly tough wasp samurai enemies, which I wholeheartedly recommend. Repeatedly fighting the wasp samurai helps teach you how to dodge in the absence of a roll, because even if you block their attacks, they still do a crap load of damage, and while their armor set is okay, their sword that they will eventually drop is a lighter, faster, and more damaging upgrade to the longsword that you get at the start of the game and can carry you through your whole run with decent attack speed and minimal stamina usage. There were a lot of cool looking armor sets I found that I just never had a reason to use, but FlyKnight very much gives the opportunity to do some fashion souls if you really want to, on top of being everything from a silly man in a loincloth carrying a giant hammer to a shit brick house of a human wall, with everything in between also being an option. Oh yeah, there's a fish sword. And how do you get the silly fish sword? Well, by fishing, of course. Fishing is actually very important in FlyKnight, not only because it serves as a nice break in between dungeon forays, but also because you can keep the fish and use them as buffs. Outside of your gear, consuming fish is the only way to get any sort of stat increase in the game, albeit a temporary one. Some fish are a one-time replenishment to health or mana, or a slow but very useful drip feed of recovery that can be the difference between making it through a long dungeon crawl and having to go back to the nearest bonfire to recharge your health and potion uses and try again. There's other buffs from fish too, like the immunity to kickback and knockback, enhanced stamina recovery, and most importantly, enhanced kicking power. Oh yes, the kick is here. That Dark Messiah, that Postal 2, that Deathloop boot to the center mass that launches your rivals into the nearest inconvenient thing is available for your needs and is never not fun. Kicks take up a good chunk of stamina and therefore should be used carefully in between weapon attacks. If you're careless, you can and will run out of stamina, which will allow the enemy to poise break you and get a free knockdown. That is bad. Luckily, not only can you parry your enemies to get a poise break if you know you're good, but you can also do it the way I do in Souls games, where if you've got enough stamina economy, you can just wail on someone until their poise is broken and get a free crit. Lord Sword and Greatsword gang rise up, and when you poise break an enemy, be it through a perfectly timed block or just wearing them down, you could take advantage of their stun to do a massive amount of damage to them since their guard is down, or you can kick them into the sky and pancake them for even longer. Like, the normal kick is usually enough to buy you some time to get into a better position or just barely get a baddie off a ledge, but a poise break kick will launch someone wherever you want them to go. Now imagine doing this with a buffed kick from fishing. There's also a whirlwind spell that works a lot like kicking, except for that it's an AoE around you, and don't forget to move towards your enemies while you're using whirlwind to increase its effectiveness. But that's just not as fun as kicking some dude off a cliff. Now let's get into why we were all drawn to FlyKnight in the first place. It nails that 2007 RuneScape aesthetic. I played a good deal of that back in high school, but I was a scrub who never even maxed out a single skill because, well, I guess I just didn't have it in me. I'm sure you can tell just by looking at the gameplay for the last however many minutes this video has been running, but FlyKnight does a great job at emulating the look of old RuneScape while still having a bit of modernization. The buggy faces are more detailed than anything I remember in RuneScape, but the color palette just feels right. The animations have that intentionally choppy look to them, which by the way, if you don't like that, you can just turn it off or further tweak it in the options menu, and the sounds they use that have that slight crunchiness to them. Playing it definitely does not feel like RuneScape though, but it feels like the people involved love old school RuneScape to pieces, which is more than enough to know how to properly emulate without just outright cribbing it. Another reason it doesn't feel like RuneScape is because, in case you somehow haven't figured this out yet, it plays like a first-person Souls. I wouldn't say like a King's Field though. Much like that 2007 RuneScape aesthetic, FlyKnight very much takes the core ideas of a Souls game without trying to rip it off wholesale to chase a trend. The game is a first-person experience at its core, and therefore there's no dodge roll. Backstabs aren't technically a thing, although you can attack people from behind, and instead FlyKnight opts for a more precise form of heavy damage by having certain parts of each individual enemy be unarmored and therefore a great way to take out a big chunk of their health. You get rechargeable healing items, but you can't hoard consumables like you could in some Souls games to get your way through bosses. Also, over-leveling is off the table. You do rest at a bonfire though, which also acts as your soapstone for multiplayer. The storytelling is done in a very Soulsy way, with a scant amount of NPCs talking to you as if you're already up to speed with the world, and there are items that hint at things in the story, but there are no descriptions, so you're not gonna get that much. I do, however, await VatiVidia's Prepare to Cry video on the silly Mushroom Man armor set that you find in the swamps in front of the castle ramparts. What really makes FlyKnight feel Soulsy is the level design and the enemy placement. All the major areas in FlyKnight have plenty of verticality to them with lots of back doors, and there are multiple paths that can lead to the same area if you look closely. Things naturally loop back to hub areas like in dungeons. There's also plenty of that thing way off in the distance there is going to be the next major area too. As for enemy placement, FlyKnight is great with having enemies that play off each other's strengths, like the Ladybug Sorcerer often getting paired with the Spider Summoner, which I'm not going to show because also I think it's a good time to mention this game does have an arachnophobia mode if that is important to you, which you can toggle in the options. The gist of it is you're never just gonna have like a crapload of enemies thrown at you. You're gonna have like interestingly placed combinations of enemies. Finally, it would not be this retro style throwback game without a few filters and settings you can tweak for your own amusement. On top of the previously mentioned animation stuttering you can play with for that RuneScape 2007 feel, there's also the ability to add visual noise as well as a host of filters and color palettes. There's even some more interesting ones, like a black and light mode with heavy shadows called Lighthouse and Fire Blue. If you really want to look at everything in Fire Blue for the whole game for some reason, you can do that. I don't know, man, it's just not for me, but if this is your thing, have a ball. Okay, story time. In case you're new here, how we do it is we go over the premise, core concepts, and world building stuff, and then we get into the plot synopsis, which will be marked for spoilers, so you can avoid those if you don't want them. So to start, the premise is that you are one of the FlyKnights. Well, a fly squire, but there's not much time for splitting hairs, as given the state we start the game in, things are a little urgent. The FlyKnights were, keyword being were, in a tenuous alliance with the remaining Wasp Samurai in a Hail Mary attempt to storm the keep of the Luna Moth, who has used her magic to steal the wings of all the other bugs in the world. It did not go well. You got sold out somehow and wake up at the end of a surprise attack that decimated your forces. You're a determined little fly guy though, so you're gonna keep pressing on. There's plenty of in-game world building to fill out the story and to hint at a greater world beyond what we see in the game. For instance, it's implied during most of the game that the curse the Luna Moth has put on all the fly people, causing presently living ones to have their wings wither and fall off, and newer flies, like the player character, to be born without any wings at all, is happening on a much larger scale to other bug races too, and this attack was supposed to be a coalition between all the bugs that had their wings stolen. You can pick up from conversations with the only non-hostile wasp that their warrior culture runs deeper than the flies and is more akin to samurai, as contrasted against the FlyKnight's looser take on the feudal knight thing. The Luna Moth also seems to be gathering all the other magically inclined bugs to whatever she's doing, as while most of the underlings are implied to be thralls and missing their wings, the ladybug casters get to keep theirs. The exception, of course, are the wasps, but we learned from our Ronin buddy here that they've been recently subjugated, and it was the remaining free wasps that joined our cause. Okay, time to explain the plot as best I can. Spoilers incoming. You know what to do if you don't want them. So back when we were first woken up, yeah, we were definitely set up. We don't know by who yet, but once we get into the caves leading to the Luna Moth Sanctum, where we meet a friendly wingless vagrant fly like ourselves, he points us in the right direction. He's also pretty tall for a fly. Later on, we meet our commander and the knight we were squiring for, the Dragonfly Knight. He encourages us to give up and fall back as the element of surprise has been lost and generally isn't acting very knightly. He says he's only gone this far because he's looking for other wayward flies and, yeah, this is suspicious. After defeating the first boss, we see him again, and he's got even less excuses now, and surprise, surprise, the Dragonfly Knight was in league with the Luna Moth. Pretty easy to figure out since he was the only fly we've met that still has wings. He's a decently hard fight, but once you figure out how to dodge to the left where his halberd isn't, it's not too hard. He also uses magic like the Lunamoth if it wasn't obvious enough already. We soldier on into the old keep of the Lunamoth deep within the caves, which has certainly seen better days, and just before we storm the inner sanctum, we're confronted by the Ronin Wasp who wants to defeat the Lunamoth himself, and is admittedly a harder fight than the Lunamoth herself. That might have something to do with the fact that she almost exclusively does magic-based damage though, and the armor set I was using was very lightweight, so I got a lot of attacks in, and had a very high magic resist. Just before confronting the Lunamoth and ending this whole mess, we meet the Vagrant one last time, who, despite not using any weapons, has been able to get farther than us, faster than us. He warns us that the Lunamoth is one tough customer before we go in and confront her. Behold, the Lunamoth. Oh god, I think she's a VTuber. Side note here, as I learned more about Twitch in the process of getting ready to branch out, as, you know, it's been a minute, and while I just get that VTubers are a normal thing now and just a new way of streaming that people do, and people enjoy it very much, why are like half of them moths? Like, I know there's a lot of variety in what VTuber personas are based on, but I was not expecting so many moths. I'm not like against it, it just perplexes me. If you are a moth VTuber and watching this, could you please explain? Back to the game though, as we send the Lunamoth to the great lamp in the sky, the vagrant fly comes back. It turns out that he is the patron god of all flies, and he explains to us that the Lunamoth was stealing all the wings of all the other bug people because she was trying to amass enough power to fly to the moon and usurp the moon god. The fly god takes his wings back among the many others that were stolen and sends us back to the surface to continue our journey. To be continued? My final thoughts on FlyKnight are that it's great. It's my new favorite non-FromSoft Souls game. It is awesome and you should buy it not just to help fund more immersive sims, but by its own merit. This game is absurdly cheap. It is $6 when it is not on sale. I believe as I upload this, the introductory offer might still be there. That is cheaper than a family-sized bag of chips at the store, and you will not hate yourself nearly as much after finishing FlyKnight in one sitting. That is cheaper than any of those take-home meals at the store that look okay, but I don't think you're ready to commit to them because I didn't see when those were made. That's cheaper than any given combo menu item at Taco Bell. Like, yeah, there are a couple of those boxes that are $5, but there's like barely anything in them, but you get the point. Any combo item that has stuff you actually want in it at Taco Bell is more expensive than this game. What the hell happened to Taco Bell? I only went there specifically to compare the prices of combo meals to this game, and the last time I went to Taco Bell was about 3 months and change ago when I did the same thing for Indie Ween. You used to be good, Taco Bell. You used to be cheap. You used to be fun. Taco Bell has fallen. Billions must find a new thing to eat at 4 in the morning. Wababoy has been actively patching FlyKnight post-launch, and in a recent update post has confirmed that there will be more FlyKnight someday, but remember, they still gotta get Sorceress finished. In the meantime, we're gonna get an NG Plus sooner or later, and this is a co-op game. You can play this solo like I did, or you can play with your buds to see who is the coolest bug of them all. Heck, the whole squad can play this game for less than the price of a single copy of Payday 3. I am still salty about buying into the $90 version of that game on good faith based on Payday 2. And I know I have no one to blame but myself for that, but you will not entice me to come back to Payday 3 so easily by just waving Jacket from Hotline Miami in front of me. I have some standards, damn it. Coming up next is most likely going to be Peripedia. I've got a bit of catch up to do on Halloween in July behind the scenes after partying a little too hard at MagFest, but I know I can keep it up and get back on track. Thank you all so much for watching, and an extra special thank you to all my patrons at patreon.com/charlatanwonder who make these videos possible. Something as simple as watching the video and leaving your like, subscribing, or commenting does help this channel out a ton, and that's all you need to do to just help me get into the algorithm front page and all that good stuff. But if you do have the extra cash, patronage is what keeps me sponsor free and making videos about real stuff instead of AAA slop. Oh yeah, and since I forgot if I've mentioned this elsewhere, but I've made a little change to the Patreon, and where all the update posts about what I'm doing and what I'm planning on doing are free now that Patreon has a system where you can follow but not necessarily pledge. Feel free to check it out if you'd like, and maybe one day when you see something you do want to pledge for, you'll already be there. If anything, it's just an easier way for me to keep everyone in the loop without spamming the YouTube community posts. Now let's sign off. Remember that no matter what you do, be it fashion souls, creative writing, or music, what you do should never be called content. It is art. Content is a word which has been twisted into meaning a means of taking all your skills, your passions, and aspirations and grinding them down into a gray sludge that exists only to make some line go up. Your art does not deserve that. Your art is inalienably a reflection of you by the very means of its creation, and in no way do you deserve that. Art is sacred. Art is worth fighting for. So get out there and fight for your art by fighting against the contentification of everything. Stay saucy.
Chonkulus, behold! I made a loaf as big as you are. Oh, this is a dangerous game. I could drop this at any second. Oh, that's got people seasoning on it. Chonkulus. Look how mighty it is. It is enormous. The camera doesn't even know what to focus on. Okay, if I have it against the thing here. I also, don't worry, I have like a little oven gripper thing on. I'm not burning here, although this is fresh out of the oven. I'm just doing silly things today. This is me with my brain on vacation. I do silly things, like make loaves of bread the size of the Chonkulus. Actually, we're gonna put this away before I drop it. Down you go. Okay, that's a lot less uncomfortable. Seriously. Look at the size of this thing. As comparison, this is a 14-inch cast iron. One of the big fellas. This is the loaf. This. Oh, he's not loafing no more. He's just vibing. I've woken him up with my absurd loaf. I've been cooking all day. I'm gonna go take a shower now.